All right, we are on the record. Good morning. This is Jonathan Sykes on behalf of the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. Today is January 31st, 2022. It is 9:07 a.m., and we are here in the case of Diane DeVito versus BTB Group, LLC, and Randy Poxson, CHRO number 2250025. I have with me on the line the complainant and the respondent in this matter. If we can, I'd like to just go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves, starting first with the complainant counsel, then the complainant, then respondent counsel, and then the respondent.
Good morning, everybody. Ian Gottlieb on behalf of Diane DeVito, the complainant.
Diane DeVito.
Tucker McQueenie, representative for the respondents.
Randy Poxson for BTB Group, LLC.
All right, thank you all very much. Okay, so we are going to start first with my questions for the complainant. So to get started, Ms. DeVito, I'm going to have you swear an oath. So please go ahead and raise your right hand. And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I have a variety of specific questions based on the complaint that you filed, but I've also just got some basic intro questions that we're going to go through first to just kind of get a sense of your history and everything like that. So you've alleged that you were denied a reasonable accommodation request. So my first question for you is, do you have a disability?
Yes.
And what disability is that?
It is a mental disability of anxiety.
Okay. And how long have you had anxiety?
Basically my whole life, since childhood.
Since childhood. Okay. So were you formally diagnosed in childhood by a treating provider?
I was put in special classes in middle school.
Okay. And when you say special classes, was that just in school, or were you seeing a therapist or a doctor or something along those lines?
We had a counselor to go to.
Okay. Okay. And so what limitations does anxiety impose on your daily life?
Being able to communicate well with others, socially interact, which I have to do on a daily basis for work. So.
Okay, very good. All right, so I am going to pull up a letter that I received from you. And let's see here. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, very good. So do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell me what it is?
It is a letter from my mental health professional stating why I have an ESA.
Okay, so and when you say an ESA, you mean an emotional support animal, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I've got just a couple questions about this. So I see that this is written by Miss Haley Needich. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, tell me about your relationship with her.
So I met her on an online website looking for a therapist. I've seen her for about a year now. She doesn't take insurance, so she's about $180 per session. So I've seen her maybe a few times a year.
Okay, so you said that you've been seeing her now for a year. When did you first start seeing her? So was that in like January 2021 that you first started seeing her?
Correct. It was the beginning of last year.
Okay. And why had you decided to reach out to her?
Just transitions through life are difficult, and I think talking with a therapist is important.
Okay. Had you had a prior therapist before this, aside from the counselor that you previously mentioned? Had you had any kind of private therapist?
Yes, but she no longer was working, so I transferred to another therapist.
All right, very good. So how often do you see her? Is this a weekly basis, monthly basis?
So this is virtual. I see her maybe a few times a year. I wouldn't say monthly.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. All right. So tell me about your discussions of the emotional support animal. So who first brought up the idea of using an emotional support animal?
I did. I've had my dog for a few years now, but he's basically all I have. I'm single. I live by myself. I don't have a lot of family. So when I'm with him, he causes the ultimate comfort that I need in order to continue my daily functions.
Okay. Um, how long have you had your dog at this point?
He will be 6 in April.
6 in April. And did you get him as a puppy?
I did.
Okay. All right, very good. If I determine that I need to speak with Ms. Nidich, do you think that she'd be able to speak to me?
Sure.
All right, very good. So that is all of my questions about that. Okay, so just so I know, what is your current address?
I live in Coventry, Connecticut.
Okay, and what's your current monthly rent?
It's 900.
900. Okay, and now just so I know, did you move into that apartment before or after the application to 29 Main Street in Brantford?
After.
After.
I'm simply living with family.
You're living with family, you said?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, very good. So let's get into the questions that I have for your application to 29 Main Street in Brantford. So just from your recollection, tell me about the process of filing the application and going through the whole thing.
Okay, so in May of last year, I was looking for an apartment. I spoke to my sister, and she had referred me to Randy because she was a former tenant. She provided me with his email. I reached out to him via email, asking if there were any units available, to which he said yes, there was one coming in August. We then scheduled a viewing. I went to go view it, to which he mentioned that there was an older lady who doesn't like the smell of weed, so I was to not smoke weed, which I agreed to. I then submitted an application, and it was approved the next morning. So I went back and provided the deposit and signed the lease. And then it wasn't until the end of July that I had informed him of my emotional support animal and would provide him with my mental health professional letter. He quickly shot me down and said that there were no pets allowed. I assumed because he was a landlord and knew fair housing laws that I reiterated that under fair housing laws, emotional support animals are not the same as pets. To which he told me if I had addressed this sooner to him, he could have gone with another tenant who didn't have a pet. To which I answered, this is the exact reason as to why I waited to inform you in fear of being discriminated against. He
Okay.
told me that he was not discriminating against me, that he knew the laws and he could do what he wanted. And therefore,
Okay, so
go ahead.
I want to pull back just a little bit. So I just want to authenticate a couple of things here. So I'm going to share my screen again. So you mentioned that you had, let's see here. Actually, here, wait one moment. Just so as to not confuse the recording here. I'm just gonna pull up some of the emails that I received from the respondent, and I want to make sure that these are the emails that you were exchanging. But while I pull those, say again.
When we were discussing this issue, this was done in person.
That part was done in person, right?
Yes.
So I just want to sort of pull back a little bit and go back to May. So prior to the initial viewing, where you testified that you were emailing back and forth, did you have any kind of phone conversations at that point, or was it all via email at that time?
It was all email.
All email. Okay, great. And I just want to share my screen now that I've got the emails up, just to make sure that we're talking about the same emails. So can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Do you recognize these?
Yep.
Okay. Are these the emails that you and Mr. Poxson exchanged?
Yes, prior to viewing the apartment.
Okay, yeah. So we see here that we have emails going from May 22nd through the week to, I think it's May 27th that the last email is in this chain. All right, very good. And then so you testified that there weren't any sort of verbal communications at that point in time. Then you met for the viewing. At the viewing, you had the discussion about the elderly neighboring tenant who didn't like the smell of weed. At that point in time, did Mr. Poxson mention anything about the tenant having any kind of disability or allergies or lung issues, or was it just that she didn't like the smell?
Just that she didn't like the smell.
Okay. All right, let's see here. So we've gone through, is there anything else about the viewing that you want to mention to me that you can remember? Anything that stuck out?
Nope.
Okay. Just so I know, what attracted you to the unit in the first place?
The location.
Okay. Now, what's valuable about the location for you?
It's right downtown in Brantford.
Okay. Let's see here. Did Mr. Poxson mention anything about the no pets policy during the initial viewing, or did that only come later?
That was when he had provided me with the application.
Okay, so you went and in person you picked up the oh wait, sorry. Did you pick up the application at the viewing then?
Okay, yeah. So afterwards, yes.
Okay. So you pick up the application and then you filed it later that day, correct?
Yes, correct.
All right, very good. And once again, I just want to verify the application, which was submitted by the respondent. I'll just pull it up here. All right, can you see my screen? Ms. DeVito, can you see my screen?
Oh, yes, I apologize.
No, yeah, no problem. So do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
Okay, is this the application that you filed to apply into the apartment?
Yes.
Okay, very good. And so you kind of addressed this a little bit already, but I have a question that I want to ask. So if we look here on the second page of this application, there is a line that says, I understand that this is a smoke-free building and that pets are not allowed, and you initialed that. So at that point in time, you understand that there's a policy for no pets, but you decide that you're not going to disclose that you intend to move in with your emotional support animal. What was your motivation in not disclosing at that point in time?
Because there was nothing written in regard to the exception to ESAs, emotional support animals, or service dogs, provided that there was a letter from a mental health professional or a doctor, I was a little weary that I would be discriminated against.
Okay. All right, very good. So you file the application. You do that by email, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then so you go, what happens after you file the application? I know that you eventually signed a lease.
So the next morning, Randy had let me know that it was approved.
Okay. So you're approved for the application, and then I'm not necessarily going to need to go through and verify every single email that the respondent submitted, but so it looks like they're valid copies of your communications here. So I saw a number of emails exchanged between you and Randy, sort of coordinating for the next month or so, talking about, what are the dimensions of the unit. You were asking about the balcony outside, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And so you also coordinated dropping off payments, your security deposit, and I think it was your first month's rent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So you end up meeting with Mr. Poxson on July 28th, 2021, right?
That's correct.
So that's your third meeting with him. That's after you first met for the viewing. Then you met to drop off sign the lease, right? And then later you met with him on the 28th. So what was the purpose for that third meeting? What were you doing?
To pick up the keys.
You're picking up the keys. Okay. So you kind of already reviewed a little bit what happened at that meeting. But I want to just sort of go through it one more time. So,
Sure.
During this meeting, you were there to pick up the keys. When did the topic of you moving in with your dog first come up?
The very beginning.
The very beginning. Okay. So you brought up that you were going to be bringing your dog. And now when you very first brought it up, did you mention that the dog was an emotional support animal, or did that part come later?
No, that was how I addressed my dog.
Okay.
So there wouldn't be any confusion.
Okay. And so once again, let's just sort of go through it bit by bit. So, when you first brought up your emotional support animal, what was Mr. Poxson's response to that sort of the first time you brought it up? What did he say?
That there were no pets allowed.
Okay. And did he elaborate that on that any further, or was it just, nope, it's a term in our lease, no pets allowed?
Yep, basically that was it. You couldn't move in because you have this pet, quote unquote.
Okay. And so what was your response to that when he told you, no, there's no pets allowed?
I had reiterated that under fair housing laws, emotional support animals are not viewed as pets and a reasonable accommodation should be made.
And what was then his response to that?
He was mad that I did not tell him to begin with, and that he could have gone with another renter who didn't have a pet.
Okay. Did you I know that you were prepared to offer the letter. Did you specifically offer the letter at that point in time? Did you have a copy with you or anything along those lines?
No, it's digital, so I didn't have it with me.
Okay.
But I did offer it.
Okay, you did offer it. Okay. Did he express any interest in taking a look at the letter?
No.
Okay. At the time that you were having this conversation on the 28th, it's your testimony that he was saying no pets allowed. Did he bring up the neighboring elderly tenant during this conversation?
No, it was just the fact that I had a pet and pets weren't allowed.
Okay. Through this conversation, did he give you the keys?
No.
Did you ask for them?
Yes.
Okay. What did he say about that when you asked for the keys?
I can't let you move in. You lied to me. You have a pet. You can't move in.
Okay. So what did you do after this meeting?
I spoke to an attorney that I work with real estate closings.
Okay.
Who had gotten me in communication with my attorney now, Ian.
Okay. And so I think I saw an email that was submitted by the respondent, Attorney Kelsey. Is that who you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. And so Attorney Kelsey submitted just essentially a link to a government report about landlords' obligations to accept emotional support animals. So what happened after that email was sent?
Randy had responded with saying that there's no pets allowed, and that's what I agreed to. Then all of a sudden, there was a situation with a tenant of his who has allergies.
Okay. And then after that, after you got sort of the additional email confirming that he would not be renting to you, you arranged to, have all the payments returned and everything like that. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So what's been the impact of being denied this rental? What's the impact been on you?
Emotionally and mentally, it took me.
Bless you.
I actually haven't been able to find an apartment until now. I was desperate. My sister's mother-in-law offered this space, although I still have to pay. But because of the moratoriums, what was going on in the real estate market, it was ultimately tiring to even try and get an apartment.
Okay. Now just forgive me. I've always been terrible when it comes to Connecticut geography. So Branford and Coventry, how far away are they approximately, would you say?
Like an hour and a half, maybe a little over an hour.
An hour, a little over an hour. And so what was the motivation for moving into Branford?
I had previously lived there.
You previously lived there. Were there any connections to work or anything like that?
Most of my work is down on the shoreline. I've started working up here as well, but
Okay.
I'm more familiar down there.
Okay. All right. So the primary motivation was just that, you had previously lived there and you wanted to move back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Very good. And so I think that's all the questions that I have for you. Are there actually before we move on, are there any sort of specific money damages that you've experienced as a result?
Having to move so many times. I had rented a U-Haul. I also had storage units because I couldn't find an actual place to live. The last few months have just been really hectic.
How long was it before you ended up moving in with family after this fell through?
I didn't move here until December of 2021.
Okay, so the rental was essentially denied at the sort of end of July, beginning of August of 2021. What were you doing between that time and the time that you moved in with family?
I was kind of couch surfing with friends.
Okay. And then you said that you had storage units?
That's where all my stuff was, yes.
Okay. All right, very good. So that is the conclusion of my questions for you, Ms. DeVito. So what we'll do now is Attorney Gottlieb, if you have any follow-ups that you think should be asked, we'll go through those at this time. The way that we'll do this is, Attorney Gottlieb, you'll ask your question, and then if I decide that I need an answer, I'll tell Ms. DeVito either to answer or not answer the question. So Ms. DeVito, before you give an immediate response, just wait for me to say yes or no, essentially. So if I don't think I need the answer to a question, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you. Ms. DeVito, you had, after Attorney Kelsey had sent her email to Mr. Poxson, you had a series of emails with Mr. Poxson?
Correct.
Okay. And the second to last page of what Mr. Poxson had submitted in his answer begins with an email dated July 29th of 2021. And Mr. Poxson is responding to an email or sending you an email. At any point in time after even Attorney Kelsey had gotten involved, did Mr. Poxson refer to your dog as an emotional support animal?
No.
You can answer that question.
Oh, I'm so sorry for not waiting.
No, that's all right.
No.
Did he only refer to it as a pet?
You can answer that.
Yes, that's how he referred to me, say.
With regard to the neighboring tenant, you had indicated early that Mr. Poxson had only indicated that the tenant didn't like the smell of weed. I just want to confirm that at that point in time, did Mr. Poxson tell you any other information about the neighboring tenant?
You can answer that.
No, he did not.
Did he at any point in time tell you that the neighboring tenant was allergic to animals?
You can answer that.
No, he did not.
Did he tell you whether or not he had to make a reasonable accommodation for the neighboring tenant due to her asthma or allergies?
You can answer that.
No, he did not.
I have nothing further.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Attorney Gottlieb. Attorney McQueenie, do you have any follow-ups that you think should be asked?
I do. Mr. DeVito, I think you indicated, and just correct me if I'm wrong, did you indicate that the reason why you didn't disclose the existence of the support animal was because you were concerned about being rejected, that your application would be rejected if that was known to the landlord?
You can answer that, Mr. DeVito.
Wrong. I was in fear of being discriminated against, not being rejected.
How many times have you applied for an apartment and been discriminated against?
You can answer that, Mr. DeVito.
A few times before, which gave me a little bit of anxiety about applying.
When was that?
You can answer that.
In previous months.
When you say in previous months, Ms. DeVito, are you talking before you had done the application for this property?
Yes.
Okay. When approximately were those applications filed?
I don't know exactly.
Okay. Was that still in 2021 or was it earlier in 2020?
It may have been in 2021, may have been 2020.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Attorney McQueenie.
Yes. You're representing, there's a landlord in Connecticut that you submitted an application to that discriminated against you because you have a support animal. Is that correct?
Not necessarily an application, but more of which you have a conversation and say, I have an emotional support animal. And they respond with, no, we don't take pets, sorry.
Do you know the identity of that individual?
Not off the top of my head.
Do you have that information somewhere else?
I'm going to butt in here really quick, Attorney McQueenie.
I'm sorry.
Ms. DeVito, did you file claims against any of those other individuals?
I did not.
Why not?
I didn't know I could.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Attorney McQueenie.
Can you, how many months or days or weeks, any information you have about before you submitted this application to Mr. Poxson, how long ago was the last time that you were discriminated against by a Connecticut landlord because you have a support animal?
I'm not sure of the dates.
How many times were you discriminated against by a Connecticut landlord because you have a support animal?
Not many.
Do you have any, can you narrow that down a little bit? Any idea how many? Was it 2? Was it 10?
Maybe 1 or 2.
Here, let me once again butt in. Ms. DeVito, did you sign leases with any of those individuals?
I did not.
Okay, thank you. Attorney McQueenie, go ahead.
When did you first, and I'm not going to ask any questions about what the content of any discussion was with Attorney Kelsey or Gottlieb or anybody else. When did you first discuss a reasonable accommodation with Attorney Kelsey?
I would have to object to that because it's kind of difficult to separate when the conversation took place and what the conversation is, and in terms of how that conversation comes up. I'd still say that it would be protected by attorney-client privilege, even as to when that conversation first took place. I think that based on the evidence that has been submitted so far in the form of the answer by Mr. Poxson, that we know that at least on July 28th of 2021, that Attorney Kelsey was involved. So to the extent that there's an email from Attorney Kelsey to Mr. Poxson stating that there are fair housing laws that he does have to comply with, we know that Attorney Kelsey's involvement began at least on July 28th publicly. Anything prior to that would not be relevant or allowed.
So I'll also just say I don't necessarily need the answer to that question.
Did you contact any attorney about these other times when you were discriminated against by a Connecticut landlord because you have a support animal?
That you can answer, Mr. Vito.
No.
I don't have any other questions.
All right, thank you. Attorney Gottlieb, do you have any kind of redirect that you want to do?
I do, briefly. Ms. DeVito, were you aware that you had rights with regard to an emotional support animal prior to Mr. Poxson's, your interactions with Mr. Poxson?
You can answer that question.
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware that you could just talk to any attorney and ask them, such as Attorney Kelsey or her, and ask her, specific questions that you may not have known the answer to?
You can answer that.
Can you say the question? I'm sorry.
Sure, I'll rephrase it. As attorneys, we have knowledge that most people don't have. Is it easier to have a conversation with an attorney about what your rights are as opposed to trying to look things up on your own?
You can answer that.
Yes.
Okay. And you were aware that having an emotional support animal allowed you to do certain things that other people can't just because they're pets, correct?
You can answer that.
Correct.
Okay. With regard to the prior landlords that we're discussing, were you aware that you could make claims against them for discriminating against you for having an emotional support animal?
You can answer that.
I was not.
I have nothing further.
Okay, thank you. All right, very good. So, Ms. DeVito, that is the conclusion of the questions for you. So we are next going to move on to my questions for Mr. Poxson. So, Mr. Poxson, if you would, please go ahead and raise your right hand. And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so I've got some specific questions about the complaint that's been filed. I also have some just sort of introductory questions that we're going to run through first. So first off, this is a complaint on the basis of disability discrimination. So a question that I've got for you is, do you have any kind of disabilities?
I do not.
Okay. And now tell me, what is your role at BTB Group?
Well, since pandemic started, I've been in charge of leasing the apartments and doing the books. And basically at this point, I've done everything for the last couple of years. I have a partner, but I've been the key person.
Okay. And prior to the pandemic, what were you doing?
Well, we own a construction company, so I was more involved with the construction aspect of what we were doing. But when the pandemic hit, the bookkeeper retired, and she was kind of the person that had been taking care of things. So I kind of filled the gap.
Okay. So you said, did I hear your testimony correct, that you're one of the owners of BTB Group?
Yeah, I'm a member. Yes.
You're a member. Okay. And so how long have you been a member of BTB Group?
Since we founded it in 2003, approximately.
Okay, thank you. And then you said that, your duties with respect to 29 Main Street, those kind of kicked off with the start of the pandemic.
Yeah, at that point I was the one that was showing apartments and taking care of, because during the pandemic we had nobody else working, so I was taking care of the tenant complaints. I was taking care of the leasing. I've been doing the books, and then basically I've been responsible for most of the activity.
Do you have any kind of prior experience with that, or was this your first time doing any of that kind of work?
Well, truthfully, the person in the office usually took care of it, but I would fill in and do, like, I might show an apartment if I wasn't busy. So it kind of worked as a small group.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So during your time working as sort of the I guess I'll just use the word property manager because that sounds to be the best term for it.
Yeah.
And in your time acting as property manager for the 29 Main Street address, have you handled any reasonable accommodation requests from any of your current tenants?
We've never had a reasonable accommodation request.
Okay.
If, other than, no, we really haven't. I mean, we have people that have maybe some, we have handicapped people in the building, but they never made a request for anything special.
Okay. Anybody ever?
Oh, so I have a guy
requested-
that, an example, there's a guy that's handicapped. He can't clean the snow from his car. So if it snows, I always make sure his car is clean, things like that.
Okay. Did he ever specifically request that from you, or is that just something
Actually,
that you?
he did. He
Okay,
said, hey,
okay.
if you're in the area, could you, and it's minor things.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. Okay. So, if you can, just describe the complex at 29 South Main Street. So first off, how many units are there?
There's 20 residential units,
Okay.
and in the part of the building that we're referring to as 29 South Main. It's attached to the front part of the building, which is a commercial area,
Okay.
which
Okay.
is a separate address.
Okay. And so now is this all one single building?
Yeah, it used to be a movie theater a long time
Okay.
ago.
Okay. And now for entry into the units, for each individual tenant that goes comes to the property to walk into their unit, is the entry into their unit, is it an exterior facing door, or do they have to go down like a single hallway along those lines, sort of like a more traditional apartment complex?
No, well, the first floor units have a door directly to the outside, a glass sliding door,
Okay.
and then an interior entry. The second floor units all have they're an interior entry style.
Okay.
So it's a long common hallway.
I see. Okay. And what kind of common areas are there at the property?
There's on the second floor, the common areas would be the laundry room, the storage rooms, and the stair lobby on the end of on each end of the hallway.
Okay. Are there laundry hookups in the individual units?
There are not. It's common laundry area.
Okay. Do you have any cleaners that come through and clean the property on a regular basis?
Yeah, the property is cleaned once a week.
Once a week. Okay. All right. So now tell me about your relationship with Miss Vandermalen. I know that you've had a more sort of pronounced relationship just as the property manager over the last couple of years, but just tell me, what you know about Miss Vandermalen as a tenant.
So Ms. Vandermalen was the second person to move into the building.
Mm-hmm.
And I think her tenancy dates from about 2007, if I'm not mistaken. I think she's been there 15 years.
Okay.
And she was a social worker, if I'm not mistaken. She was an assistant professor. I'm sure she can elaborate on that. But she's a tenant that's, has asthma. She's allergic to many things, and dogs are one of those things.
Okay. So, how often do you normally interact with her? Is it regular interaction, sparse?
The interaction with her is generally, once a month, once every 2 months, and it will usually be with, there's cigarette smoke, there's dust on the outside, there's,
Okay.
She lets us know of her concerns because it is a smoke-free building.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you'll have to address people that don't pay attention to, what the rules are.
Okay. So essentially she complains about, various issues at the property. Is that right?
Sometimes.
Okay. And when she makes those complaints, does she connect any of those complaints to her disability or?
Yes, without question.
Okay. So that was essentially going to be my next question is, how do you know about her issues with asthma and allergies and everything like that?
She's always been very, very forthright about telling us.
Okay.
About that. Since she's moved in, it is not it's something we're well aware of in the building.
Okay. Has she ever made about complaint? She's complained about smoking, dust. Has she ever complained about dogs?
Because they're not allowed in the animal, or they're not allowed in the building. We haven't allowed them in the building, and because of that, as much as anything.
Okay, so have you ever gotten any complaints from her about pet dander or anything like that?
I have not, no.
Okay. Okay, so let's move on to the complainant. So you saw the emails that I had brought up to sort of show the conference earlier, where the emails were exchanged between you and Miss DeVito in May leading up to the initial viewing. I just want to confirm with you, did you have any kind of telephone or verbal communications with Miss DeVito prior to the viewing, or was it all just those emails?
I think there were a couple of phone calls early, but honestly, I can't say for sure. It's been a long time.
Okay. To the extent that such phone calls occurred, do you remember what they were?
But probably that she asked me if there was an available apartment.
Okay, just simple stuff like that.
Yeah, it wasn't any more than that.
All right, so tell me about your recollection of the viewing.
When Ms. DeVito came for the viewing, I did explain that the adjacent person was an older lady who had asthma, didn't like the smell of weed, didn't like the smell of cigarettes, was very particular if there might be a possibility of water and mold. I kind of let her know that this was a person who you needed to pay attention when you live next to him.
Mm-hmm. Okay. During that initial conversation talking about Miss Vandermeulen, did you specifically mention dogs or cats or anything along those lines?
Always, yes.
Okay. Was that as part of just discussing the no pets policy, or was that specifically with reference to Miss Vandermeulen?
Specifically with reference to Miss Vandermeulen, because
Okay.
you're going to be her next door neighbor.
Okay. And now, just so I know, for the units that the complainant was applying to and that Ms. Vandermeulen lives in, are these first floor units where there's that exterior door, or are these second floor units?
This is a second floor unit.
Okay, and so that's only accessible through a common hallway?
That's right.
Okay. Okay. So do you have any other recollection about the viewing that you want to provide to me? Anything that stuck out to you?
No, I hadn't advertised this apartment yet.
Mhm.
And I had a couple of cold calls, like Diane, Miss DeVito, and a couple other people had, asked me about the apartment. So, other than that, I don't have any specific recollection, because you show a lot of apartments, or I've shown a lot of apartments.
Okay. Did she mention anything about having a dog or a disability?
No, not at all.
Okay. So what happened after the viewing? So she ended up filing an application that same day. Is that right?
Yeah, she gave me an application the same day. I had shown the apartment to two other people.
Okay.
But Diane did give me the application. Her sister had lived in the building at some point in the past. I can't tell you exactly the year, but her sister did live in the building.
Okay. And so after she filed that application, what happened next?
I looked at the other couple of people, and I did get back to Diane and say, you could have the apartment based on the terms we had talked about.
Okay. And so she eventually ended up signing a lease?
She did.
Yep. Tell me about she signed the lease in person, right? She came and met with you?
Yeah, she did.
Yeah. Tell me about your recollection of that meeting.
I honestly, I don't remember much about it. I mean, it's kind of a standard thing. They come and sign a lease, they'll give you a deposit. You go through the terms of the lease, but it's pretty simple. It's not a complicated lease.
Okay, so nothing stuck out about that
Nothing
particular
stuck
meeting?
out. No.
No discussion of the dog during that meeting?
No, never a discussion. No dog in the car. No discussion of a dog at all.
Okay. All right. So she signs the lease. And then, just from the records that you submitted, there were emails that were exchanged back and forth for approximately the next 2 months, going in June into July of 2021, where you coordinate her dropping off further payments. And then we get to the day on July 28th, 2021. And so that is when you're going to be doing the handoff for the keys. Is that right?
Right.
All right, so go ahead and tell me about your recollection of what happened that day.
I want to say it was maybe 3 p.m. I think that's about when we met, and she showed up and we kind of talked a little bit, nothing in particular, and then she says, "Well, I'm moving in tomorrow with my dog." And if you're in my shoes, I became upset. I was, we had discussions for 3 months, and there had never been discussion about an animal of any type. So, yeah, I'm sure I wasn't happy with the situation.
So why did that upset you?
Well, because the person she's living next to is I don't want to say a problem tenant, but she's a tenant who's going to have a problem with an animal next door to her. There is no doubt in my mind. And so I'm thinking, oh my God, now I'm going to get sued for ADA because I'm taking away the rights of somebody that's been in the building for 15 years.
Okay. Did you bring up Ms. Vandermalen in that conversation with Ms. DeVito on the 28th? I
honestly don't know if I did exactly at that point. I was really upset. And at one point I said, I have to walk away. I walked away from her. I said, I have to talk to you later. Because I was really upset by this.
Okay.
And then her first attorney sent me a letter within an hour, basically. I was shocked.
And so what'd you do after you got that?
Well, I responded to it. And you have it there. I mean, I said that I could read it to you. It's in front of me here. I'm looking.
No, that's fine.
Yeah,
But
I was upset because now I had 2 problems to deal with.
So what was the second problem that you had to deal with?
The rights of the existing tenant who was already in the building.
Okay. So now when did you make the decision not to rent to Ms. DeVito? Was it during that, meeting with her on the 28th, or did it come a little bit later when you sent that email? Sort of when had the...
It came later when I got the email from the attorney.
Okay.
I was, I was basically stunned. And I needed to think. I just needed to walk away and think. I'd been put in a very bad position.
Okay. All right. So had you, during these couple of hours when this is all happening on the 28th, did you get in contact with Ms. Vandermalen specifically to talk about this? Or was this just based on your experience with her? You knew that this wasn't going to work?
That was my experience with her. I didn't talk to her at that point in time, no.
Okay. Did you consider any sort of possible alternatives that maybe could help it work out, where both the complainant and Ms. Vandermalen would be able to live side by side, or did you just not think it was possible?
Living side by side would not have been possible.
Okay. All right, so let's see here. We've already gone through those. So, I saw in the submissions that you provided to the commission, we have the September letter written by Ms. Vandermalen. How long after July 28th, when you said to the complainant that you weren't going to be proceeding with tenancy, how long before you ended up speaking with Ms. Vandermalen?
I don't know exactly.
Okay.
Honestly, I can't give you a date on that. I do not know.
Okay. Was it before or after you received the complaint?
It was probably before, I'm going to say it was before I received the complaint.
Okay. Do you remember what you talked about with her?
Well, I had told her that, you know, that somebody had wanted to move in with a animal next door, and she gave me her opinion of that.
And what was her opinion of that?
That it wouldn't work, that she has these, you know, asthma attacks, and they're life-threatening in her words.
Mhm.
And they can be triggered by lots of things. Animals are one. Smoke's another, dust is another. I mean, mold, you know, I can go down the list of things.
Did she ever express to you that she had ever been hospitalized or anything like that as a result of her asthma attacks?
I think she has, but I would have to let her do that. I don't want to
Sure.
be the person that,
Sure.
I don't know her whole life history, so I
Right. Right.
can't comment on that.
Do you know, have you ever seen her, or has she ever talked about carrying around like an EpiPen or anything along those lines?
No, but I've listened to her in great distress on the telephone when she's having a hard time breathing.
Okay, so you've had personal experiences with
Yes,
her
sure.
where she's in the midst of an attack.
Of an attack, yes.
Okay. Okay, can you just tell me the context surrounding that? Do you remember?
It was probably there was probably some work going on outside, and she was probably saying, look, this is causing me, you know, an attack, but I can't put that in a definitive time period because
Okay.
she's been there so long,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay. What did that take place, you know, since you've sort of taken role as the property manager, you know, since the pandemic started, or do you think that was before that?
No, that was before that.
That was before that. Okay.
Again, she's a long running tenant. She's been there a long time. You know, we've made accommodations for her over the years, and things like when she can pay her rent.
Now who ended up moving into the unit that the complainant had applied for?
A couple, a young couple that I think he's going to be a teacher, and the wife works for Yale.
Okay. Do you know whether they have any kind of disabilities?
No, they do not. No.
Okay.
None that I know of. She's Hispanic. She's Hispanic, and she works for Yale. He's, you know, kind of no. He has nothing that I can think of.
Okay. And did either of them request any kind of accommodations during the application process?
No, they did not.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. So, Mr. Poxson, that is all of the questions that I have for you. So what we'll do here is we'll first go to Attorney McQueenie and see if Attorney McQueenie has any questions that he thinks should be asked.
Just one, I think. Mr. Poxson, you indicated that there, on that application that you have, you asked that the applicants check off a box that mentions animals. And that does it mention any of the other things that sort of Ms. von der Molen is concerned about? Smoking?
You can answer that question.
That is in the lease itself. So before you sign the lease, there's a clause about it's a non-smoking building. But on the application, you know, without looking at it, I don't know. I think if you pop up the it's only a two-page application.
Yeah, I'll just say, you know, that from the application that we pulled up earlier today, there is just a one-line thing saying something to the effect of, I understand that this is a smoke-free building and there are no pets. And yes.
It says the same thing in the lease.
That's great. I don't have any other questions.
All right. Thank you, Attorney McQueenie. Attorney Gottlieb, do you have any questions that you think should be asked?
I do. Good morning, Mr. Poxson.
Good morning.
How long have you owned property for?
You can answer that.
Since 1997.
how many units do you currently own, whether it's through BTB or any other entities or individually?
You can answer that.
No residential units at present.
Just to clarify, Mr. Poxson, you mean no residential units aside from the ones at 29 South Main Street?
No, we don't. I don't own 29 South Main Street either. We sold it. We're in the process of selling it when Ms. DeVito attempted to lease the apartment.
Okay, thank you. All right, go ahead, Attorney Gottlieb.
At the time the lease was signed by Ms. DeVito, how many residential units were you managing?
Just this building, BTB Group LLC.
And you've owned this building as part of BTB Group since 2007?
We actually bought the building in the spring of 2002, but we didn't start, there's a long process of renovation and zoning, and we didn't start leasing the building until the spring of 2006.
Okay. How long have you been using this particular application for finding tenants, or for vetting tenants rather?
You can answer that.
This has basically been our application for as long as we've had this building.
I'm going to interject really quick here, Attorney Gottlieb, just with a question. Mr. Poxson, at the time that Ms. DeVito applied and signed the lease for the particular unit that we're talking about, were there any other vacant units that you had?
No.
In that complex? All right.
No, the building is kept filled all the time. I mean,
okay.
Yeah, no.
Thank you. All right, go ahead, Attorney Gottlieb.
Thank you. Do you know the difference between an emotional support animal and a pet?
You can answer that.
Okay. Yes, I do at this point.
Okay. What about July 28th of 2021? Did you know the difference?
You can answer that.
I think so. I mean, certainly a pet is different from an emotional support animal. Yes, definitely.
Okay. At the time that Ms. DeVito filled out the application and signed it on June 1st of 2021, did you understand the difference between an emotional support animal and a pet?
Yes.
Okay. Your application does not make any reference or ask any questions about an emotional support animal, correct?
No, it does not. We've never had anybody ask for one, actually. In all the years we've rented apartments, I've never had anyone ask about an emotional support animal ever.
Okay. Now, you testified when Investigator Sykes was asking you that you've never really had a reasonable accommodation request. That's correct, right?
Yeah.
So with that, has Ms. Vandermolen put to you in writing or made any reasonable accommodation request in writing of you or BTB Group with regard to her condition, her medical condition?
You can answer that.
As far as a reasonable accommodation?
So Ms. Vandermolen writes in her September 6th, 2021 letter that she essentially gives a little bit of a mini history that she's been there since 2007. Her decision was based upon certain terms in the lease. She has medical conditions that she claims, but she never submitted a letter to you in writing saying, I need a reasonable accommodation for you to prevent, as the landlord, people smoking weed, pets. She never made a request for a reasonable accommodation, correct?
She certainly over the course.
No, John, hold on one second. Jonathan, is he asked? It was a written request or a request?
So I think So, okay, so my understanding of Mr. Poxson's testimony is that Ms. Vandermalen made routine complaints about a variety of things, connected those things back to her asthma. So I think, and it is an important question, Mr. Poxson. Did Ms. Vandermalen ever make any sort of formal requests in writing relating to her asthma to you?
Over the course of 15 years, yes.
Okay. Do you know what those were?
Generally, they were always either dust-based, the smell of smoke-based, or moisture-based, and they all referred to asthma.
Okay. And so when she did that, was she looking for you to enforce your policies?
Yeah.
Was she looking for you to, okay, so she was looking for you to
Well,
enforce your
I
policies.
don't know if he can answer what, I don't think he can answer what she thought.
Well,
what
no,
she was
sorry.
doing.
What I'm saying is what he understood the request to take. Basically, was it
That's right, yeah.
a request for him to adjust some sort of practice or an exception from a policy or just enforce one of the policies?
No, her was always to enforce a policy or to make something notice, bring something to your attention.
Okay.
So, Mr. Poxson, so the policies that existed at the time that that Ms. Vandermalen came into the building were no pets, no smoking, and no grills, correct?
You can answer that.
Yes.
So the policies pre-existed everything that she has been asking you to enforce, correct?
You can answer that.
She has been in the building as long as there's been tenants.
But the policies that you have in your lease, no smoking, no grills, and no pets, pre-existed her moving into the property in 2007, correct?
Yes, they're the original policies of the property.
Now, what you had just mentioned before, dust, smoke, and moisture. Taking away the smoke, dust and moisture, as a landlord, to a certain extent, you really don't have any control over that, correct?
You have control as far as the cleaning. If there's dust that's causing a problem with some in a common area, you have control over that. Smoke, if that's brought to your attention, you try to make sure it doesn't happen. If you've ever dealt with tenants, that's an ongoing battle, but you certainly address someone's complaint about smoke. And I'm a non-smoker and I don't like smoke, so that it's always addressed.
Okay, so dust and moisture.
Ray, one second, Ray, just make sure you pause after Attorney Gottlieb asks the question so that Jonathan will tell you whether or not he wants you to answer the question.
Gotcha.
So, Mr. Poxson, for dust and moisture, if there's a problem at the building, you have obligations under 47A7 of the general statutes as a landlord to take care of those anyway, correct?
You can answer that question if you know.
That statute, I have no idea what the statute is you're quoting.
Okay. That is the statute actually that requires landlords to take care of their buildings essentially. So as a landlord, I want to make sure that we understand that there's a difference between what you're statutorily required to do in taking care of the building and addressing your tenants' complaints of what you're statutorily required to do as well. Now, with regard to this letter dated September 6th of 2021,
this is a letter by Ms. Vandermalen, correct?
Correct. How did Ms. Vandermalen provide this letter to you? Did she provide it to you via email?
You can answer that, Mr. Poxson.
I don't recall. She generally types things, but it may have been an email. I can't be sure of that.
Okay. Because this is a kind of pretty specific letter, and your testimony was that this was prior to you getting the complaint. So I'm trying to understand what the purpose of getting a letter from Ms. from Ms. Vandermolen about, I guess, her conditions when you never even had a conversation with her about my client potentially moving in with an emotional support animal. So I'm trying to understand.
Attorney Gottlieb, what's your question?
My question is, what date did you talk to Ms. Vandermolen prior to this letter being provided to you?
That you can answer, Mr. Poxson.
I do not know. I don't have a date.
How many conversations did you have with Ms. Vandermolen between July 27th of 2021 and September 6th of 2021?
You can answer that.
And again, I do not know how many conversations.
Okay. Now, Mr. Poxson, I'd like to point your attention to the reply that you had sent to Attorney Kelsey on July 28th. Now, in this email, you state, not sure what to do with this. Diane, you signed an agreement stating no animals and did not inform me of your intent to bring an animal into the building when the agreement was made. I'd like to stop right there. At this point in time, you had been made aware that the animal was an emotional support animal, correct?
Yes.
And it says the immediate neighbor is asthmatic and allergic to dogs. She has occupied her apartment for 15 years and has rights under the law. What rights does Ms. Vandermolen have under the law, only being asthmatic and allergic?
You can answer that to your knowledge.
I think she's calling. I mean, he's asked for sort of a legal conclusion there. I mean, what rights did she have?
Mr. Poxson, what was your understanding of Ms. Vandermolen's rights, with respect to having a tenant come in that would potentially trigger her asthma?
I think she has ADA rights, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not an attorney, but I know that if I have someone who's going to be made ill by something someone else does, then I think that I have to address it before it happens, so I don't get sued on the other part of it. But I'm not an attorney. I'm always trying to guess what you guys are up to. I don't know.
So I'm going to skip the next sentence.
Why?
I'm actually just gonna butt in here really quick, Attorney Gottlieb.
Sure.
Mr. Poxson, what was your concern with respect to Ms. Vandermolen if Ms. DeVito was allowed to move in? What were you, thinking was going to happen?
I was afraid that she was going to have an asthma attack and end up in the hospital. Now you have to understand, we were 1 year into a pandemic where people have been locked up. I've said enough there, I guess. It's a rough year, but I really was afraid that she was going to have health problems triggered by having a dog next door.
All right, thank you. Attorney Gottlieb, go ahead.
Thank you. So, Mr. Poxson, you then say, I have to seek legal counsel as to my rights and my other tenants' rights. I will be returning your payment tomorrow. So at that point in time on the 28th, is it fair to say that you did not know what your rights were as a landlord?
You can answer that.
Rights with respect to what?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be more specific. What your rights were as a landlord in rejecting a tenant who has an emotional support animal.
I had a tenant in the building who had health problems, and I didn't need to have those health problems exacerbated by someone else in the building, moving into the building. So you have to make a decision at that point in time. Do I deal with one problem or I deal with two problems?
Okay, but Mr. Poxson, my question is, well, I'll rephrase my question. Did you know what your rights were as a landlord to reject a tenant with an emotional support animal?
I'm going to object. I think that there's been, Mr. Poxson has indicated he's aware of several competing regulations. As you point, Attorney Gottlieb put out 47A7. He's indicated he's aware of those. And I think it's sort of, trying to break him down and link his understanding to just one part of a 5-part understanding on Mr. Poxson's part is unfair, particularly for a non-attorney.
Yeah, I will say this is getting somewhat just repetitive because
Well, I'm going to disagree with that because 47A7 has to do with the landlord's obligations to take care of the property. What we're dealing with here on the fair housing side of things is a landlord's obligation to not discriminate against the tenant's rights. There's a big distinction between someone claiming that they have asthma and they're allergic, highly asthmatic or allergic, versus somebody who has rights to having an emotional support animal on the property. I believe clearly that there is case law that's going to show the fact that Mr. Poxson is in a difficult situation, but the problem here is that he did not know what his rights were. He didn't know what my client's rights were to have an emotional support animal and bring an emotional support animal onto the property. So drilling down on what Mr. Poxson's understanding of his rights are, is really kind of important here because he violated my client's rights by rejecting her. Didn't even acknowledge that there's an emotional support animal here in these emails. And I certainly think
that's your claim. That's your claim. It's a narrative against Mr. Poxson. That's not a question. And number two, it's a misstatement of law. There is no distinction between a support animal and a allergy based on pet dander.
All right, sorry.
Landlords are not going to be evaluating degrees of disability, and HUD is very specific about that. They can't do that.
Counsel, I'm going to come in here. There will be an opportunity for closing statements at the conclusion of the conference. Mr. Gottlieb, at this point in time, I think I don't necessarily need any further answers on the whole question of what were your rights and things like that. Mr. Poxson has explained that, basically he was considering the ADA. He was worried about, this tenant that had the asthma issues. We've addressed the questions of whether the neighboring tenant made any kind of reasonable accommodation requests, whether in writing or verbal. So I think we've kind of satisfied what I'm looking for on that front. So do you have any other questions that you want to address?
Just one.
Okay.
Mr. Poxson, did you put an air filtration system in the building to address any of Ms. Vandermolen's concerns about dust or her allergies or her asthma?
You can answer that question, Mr. Poxson.
Miss Vandermolen has special filters in her apartment. Yes, she's the only unit in the building that has HEPA filters in her apartment.
Is that, Mr. Poxson, is that something that she requested that you do on her behalf, or is that something that she sort of took the initiative on and did herself?
She requested it, and then she purchases her own filters, and we change them for her.
Okay, thank you. Attorney Gottlieb?
I have nothing further.
All right, thank you. Attorney McQueenie, do you have any redirect that you want to get into?
No, thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to call in Ms. Vandermolen, and we will go through the questions that I have for her. And then what we will do is, if there's any questions that council wants to ask, I'll go first to Attorney McQueenie. And then once we go through those, I'll go to Attorney Gottlieb if you have any questions that you think should be asked. All right, so let me go ahead and just get her number and call her in.
Randy, you want to take 5 before we get to Ms. Vandermolen? Randy, you all right?
I'm good, guys. I'm okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm all right as well. I'd like to just push forward because I think that my questions for Ms. Vandermolen should be relatively short. I anticipate maybe 10, 15
absolutely.
minutes.
I just want to be, if anybody had to use the restroom or anything.
Okay, so we got 203-980-5857. All right, I'm going to call her in.
Hello.
Hi, is this Ms. Vandermolen? Hello, can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, I can. Thank you.
Hi, is this Ms. Vandermolen?
Yes, it is.
Hi, this is Jonathan Sykes calling with the CHRO. I just called you into the fact-finding conference in the case that's been filed against Mr. Poxson. So do you have a little bit of time just to answer some questions for me?
I do, and I
All
have
right,
to
very
tell you,
good.
I do have a bit of a hearing problem. Just so you know.
Okay, so just pursuant to that, Attorney Gottlieb, if you wouldn't mind, can you just mute yourself? I hear a little bit of background noise coming in every now and then.
Sure.
Just so we have it nice and clear for Ms. Vandermellen. Okay, so Ms. Vandermellen, what we're going to do
Yes.
is I'm going to have you swear an oath, and then we're going to get into my questions. Before we do that, can you just give me your full name and address?
Jean Julia Vandermellen. I use the P.O. Box.
Okay.
P.O. Box 3067.
Perfect. Thank you.
Stony Creek, Connecticut, Brantford.
All right, very good. All right, so I'm going to have you swear an oath. So if you would just raise your right hand.
Mm-hmm.
And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have a case where an applicant has, filed a claim against Mr. Poxson for, essentially disability discrimination. So I have, some questions for you about that. So, do you have any kind of disabilities, whether physical or mental?
I do.
Okay, and what kind of disabilities are they?
I have health disabilities.
Sorry, say again?
I have a health disability, a
You have a
medical
health disability.
disability.
Okay. So can you just get into the specifics for me? So what do you have?
Yes, I'm an asthmatic. I have asthma and bronchiectasis.
Okay. And so how did those conditions affect your daily life?
Substantially. I could write a book, quite frankly. Could you be more specific?
So, what is the impact on your day to day that having those conditions, imposes? What's the result of having asthma and the bronchitis?
Well, number one, it's very, very challenging, and it's daily. It's chronic. It doesn't go away. You can hear my voice will probably get raspy. I'm very trigger driven through a day. I have different things that could irritate me. The physical reaction would be shortness of breath. It's a reactive inflammation disease. So I could have shortness of breath, pressure in my chest, my airways can seize, I can have spasms, my heart rate would go up, my anxiety would go up. It would be that kind of fight or flight emergency trigger in my body when I'm exposed to, especially in terms of this matter, an animal. I specifically moved into the building because it was pet free.
Okay, so for your daily life, do you carry anything like an EpiPen?
I have an EpiPen and I have 2 inhalers, and I also use a machine.
You say you use a machine. What do you mean?
I use a machine that distributes albuterol.
Okay. Have you ever been hospitalized as a result of your conditions?
Because I manage it very, very well by avoiding such as an animal. No, I've been in the emergency room, but I have not been hospitalized. I take it very seriously, and I feel it's my responsibility to keep my asthma managed, to learn as much as I can about things that will create a trigger for me, because it's not something I want to live with every day. I live with it every day, knowing it's a life-threatening illness, but I try to manage the amount of exposure I get to toxins.
Okay. So tell me about the times that you ended up in the emergency room. How many times has that been?
I think it's only been one time. I've been in emergency situations many times. I think maybe only one time in the emergency room.
Okay, and when was that approximately?
Oh, I don't have any idea when that would have been. Years ago.
Has it been within the last
But
15 years?
yes, possibly.
Okay. So has it been since you were living at 29 South Main Street?
No.
Okay, so it was before that?
But do I have emergencies? Yes.
Okay, so for right now, I just want to, I do want to talk about those, but for right now, I just want to focus on the time that you went to the emergency room. So the time that you ended up going to the emergency room, do you remember what the cause was?
Yeah, I had difficulty breathing.
Okay. And what was that as a result of exposure to a specific trigger? And if so, what trigger was it?
Well, the bronchiectasis is different than asthma. So what happens is with asthma, it's not a direct, it can be a direct trigger, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Bronchiectasis is a disease that it's a kind of on the cerebral palsy level. It creates mucus in your airways. So the challenge is to make sure that you don't have more mucus than you should have in your airways. So it can be accumulative. There are just so many different scenarios to what would cause me to have a reaction.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, when you ended up in the emergency room, was it not sort of the result of exposure to some specific thing in the air? It wasn't like exposure to dust or exposure to mold or anything in like one isolated incident. Was it just sort of something the mucus had developed over time and that's what caused you to have to go in?
As I recall, yes. I would have to go back and look or ask or get, yeah.
So you say, you testified earlier that there have been other sort of emergency situations aside from the emergency room. Have there been? I want to sort of limit the scope of what we're talking about here. Have there been any of those?
I would like to limit this to the subject at hand.
Yeah, no. So I'm. Have there been any of those kind of issues?
I don't really want to get into my complete medical record and my complete medical history, as I feel it's confidential.
Okay. So, I'm curious about what kind of medical issues you've experienced while living in your current apartment. Specifically as they relate to triggers that have come from living in that apartment.
Smoke can be a trigger for me. Mold could be a trigger for me.
And so what have you done when smoke or mold has come up in your apartment? What did you do in response?
I have to use my the machine.
You use the machine. Okay. And did you get in touch with your landlord about that?
Yes, we've talked about. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And so when you call your landlord, what do you say?
If there was someone smoking in the building, I just say somebody was smoking in the building. Could you please address it?
Okay. And, when you made those calls, did you bring up the fact that you had asthma or any of these other conditions, or was it just, hey, there's somebody smoking, can you get them to stop?
The BTB group landlords became very aware of my condition as I moved in the building because the building was being pointed and I had just moved in and at that time told them that I was an asthmatic and that I wasn't going to be able to stay in the apartment while they were pointing the building. So from the very beginning of my tenure here, they were aware I had asthma.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned smoke issues. You mentioned mold. Can you tell me about any sort of specific calls that you made or situations that arose with respect to mold and how you addressed them?
There was mold on my air conditioner.
Mhm.
And that had to be addressed. I don't understand why we're going into all this. Aren't we just talking about an animal?
Oh, these other questions are relevant to the sort of overall picture of everything. So, when you called about the mold on the air conditioner, did you mention your asthma or anything along those lines, or was it just sort of they knew about the asthma and they knew that they had to come address it?
My asthma lives with me daily. So if there was mold, it would be in relationship to my asthma. If there was smoking, there would be in reference to my asthma. If there was an animal in the building, it would be in reference to my asthma.
Right. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, when you call up and you ask about these various issues that come up, do you in that moment specifically relate them to your asthma, or is it just sort of,
Yes.
they know? Okay. Okay. So
It's something I live. This is a very difficult chronic health issue for me that I'm aware of every day. It's chronic. It doesn't go away.
Okay.
It's there. It's life-threatening, and I deal with those issues. And as I said, my challenge is to manage my issues. That's why I was concerned when I had learned that there was possibly a dog coming into the building, and the impact that would have on me.
So when did you learn about that?
Mr. Poxson and I were in the driveway at the same time, and he told me that there was a discussion about a dog possibly, or an animal residing in the building. And as he knows, because I have, as I said, from the very beginning of my tenure, asthma was part of my discussion. And he asked me if I would like to write a note about the asthma and the impact an animal would have on me in the building.
Okay, so
I was very appreciative he had given me the opportunity to, to write about the impact it would have on me.
Okay, so you met in the driveway, and that's when he told you about this?
Yeah.
Okay. So he asked you if you would be willing to write a letter. I did see a copy of a letter that he submitted that it looks like you wrote in September of last year, September 6th. Does that sound right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, aside from that discussion, where he asked you, hey, can you write this letter? Did you have any other kinds of discussions with him about the dog coming in?
I would say no, except for, I think 2 weeks ago. Whenever you contacted him, he contacted me saying that there was going to be a hearing, and did he have my permission to give my address and phone number to, I guess, you.
Okay, very good. So how did you, for the letter itself, the September 6th letter that you wrote, how did you deliver that to him? Was that via email? Did you give him a paper copy? How'd you do it?
Well, because I'm pretty, because of COVID, I'm pretty housebound right now. I believe, and I'm not the best computer person in the world, I'm
Okay.
elderly. I believe I emailed it to him because
Okay.
I really am very limited. Again, as we know, this is an upper respiratory virus, so I have to be very cautious about getting a virus that directly attacks the lungs.
Okay. So do you, is it common that you email with him, or when you have issues, do you usually call?
I usually call.
You
Yeah.
usually call. Okay. Do you remember sending, aside from, delivering that September letter to him, do you remember sending any other emails to him within the past couple of years?
No.
Okay. And then, and we're getting to the end of my questions for you. And then, once we finish with my questions, we have the attorneys here who, if they have any questions, I'll allow them to ask. And then I'll tell you whether I need you to answer. So, prior to Mr. Poxson asking you about, writing a letter on his behalf, had you ever discussed specifically, pet dander or dog hair, cat hair, whatever the case may be? Had that ever come up for you in your years living at the apartment?
It would never come up because I moved into the building because it was a pet-free building. So we would never have had a conversation about pets.
So it never.
I moved here specifically. I want to make this very clear. I moved here specifically because this was a no pet building.
Okay.
It's very difficult to find an apartment where no pets are allowed. Many landlords do allow pets in, and I could not be in a building where there were pets. So my reason for residing here has been because of the no pet policy.
Okay. For you getting into your unit, do you have to access, can you access your unit from an exterior door, or do you have to go through a common hallway to get to your apartment?
Common hallways.
You have to go through a common hallway. And so I understand that there's a laundry room that's also a common space in the apartment, right?
Yes.
Okay. If, say hypothetically, if a tenant with an emotional support animal were to live in the complex, and they kept their emotional support animal in their unit, and they did go into the laundry room to clean their clothes, what would be the impact on you?
Could be life-threatening.
Okay. Have you ever had any specific experience with being exposed to pet dander? Ever?
I have to avoid pet dander.
So have you ever had an asthma attack as a result of exposure to pet dander?
I'm not around pets.
Do you know for a fact that you are allergic to pets?
Allergies and triggers are two different things for asthmatics.
Okay.
An allergy could be similar to a peanut allergy,
Okay.
where it's immediate, you need an EpiPen. A trigger is something that can trigger you, but you don't necessarily have to be allergic to
Okay.
you don't have to be allergic to the trigger.
Okay.
So if I was in the laundry room and there was pet dander or saliva or urine being put through the wash machine, when you shake out a piece of laundry in the dryers, you can see, I would imagine, pet hair that would accumulate. Let me put it this way. I would force to have to be removed from here if a pet came into the building. There is no way that there could be protection for me or safe for me to be in a building where a pet resided.
Okay. So has a doctor ever told you specifically that exposure to pet dander or saliva or urine or anything like that would constitute a trigger for asthma?
It's a common asthmatic trigger.
It's a
I'm
common
not
asthmatic
around.
trigger.
Right.
But
There are
you've never
certain things
personally
that
experienced it?
there are certain I'm not around pets.
Okay.
I set my life up to be, and I'm in this building because of the no pet policy.
Okay. Okay.
I don't really, quite frankly, know how many ways I could say the same thing.
All right, I think we've gotten through all my questions for Ms. Vandermalen. So I'm going to go to the attorneys. Let's start first with Attorney McQueenie. Do you have any questions that you think should be asked?
No questions on my end.
All right, thank you. Attorney Gottlieb, do you have any questions that you think should be asked? You're muted at the moment. And just, as a reminder to Ms. Vandermalen, the way that we're going to do this is the attorney will ask his question, and then I will let you know whether I actually need you to answer that question. So just wait for me to say yes or no before you answer, okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, Attorney Gottlieb, do you have any questions?
I do. Good morning, Ms. Vandermalen.
Good morning.
Is the common area carpeted or is it hardwood floor or tile?
You can answer that question.
Carpeted.
And how often did or does the landlord vacuum?
You can answer that.
I think you would have to ask them their cleaning schedule. I believe it's once a week.
Does that bother your asthma or allergies when they vacuum?
You can answer that.
I would not be in the area when they're vacuuming
And why is that?
And you can answer that.
because it has the potential to bother me.
So do you know what the schedule is that they do their cleaning?
She already answered that. You don't need to answer that, ma'am.
Okay. Ms. Vandermalen, are you allergic to chemicals?
You can answer that.
Again, there's a difference between triggers and allergies. For asthmatics, that's a common trigger. Chemicals, fumes, pet dander, dust. These are all things that are common triggers where you will be told as any literature that you look up, any common information around asthma. Those are just common triggers that you're to avoid.
Okay. What kind of chemicals trigger your respiratory issues?
You can answer that.
It can be any chemicals. I use all natural substances in my apartment. I use baking soda, hydrogen peroxide, alcohol. I use all my laundry detergents, dish detergents are all unscented. I use vinegar, borax. Those are all the things that I use to avoid chemicals in my environment.
Attorney Gottlieb, I'm going to jump in here with a question real quick. Ms. Vandermalen, so just so I sort of understand, for your potential sensitivity to chemicals, is it related to the scent of the chemicals, or is it just the nature of the chemicals themselves that causes problems?
I think that might be beyond my medical scope.
Okay.
You could repeat the question and I'll try to answer the question. I find this rather tedious and I don't understand really the questions about asthma.
Is it strong scents that tend to trigger you, or is it something intangible? Like can an odorless fume still trigger you?
And odor, I honestly, I don't know if an odor was fume could trigger me.
All right, thank you. Attorney Gottlieb, go ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Vandermolen, how many washers and dryers are in the building?
You can answer that.
On the floor that I reside on are 2 washers and 2 dryers.
Okay, do you have your own washer and dryer in your unit?
You can answer that.
I do not. Nope, I do not.
Ms. Vandermeulen, do you know whether you have washer dryer hookups in your unit?
No, there are no hookups and there's no space for a washer or dryer.
Thank you. Attorney Gottlieb, go ahead.
You indicated before that you could potentially be sensitive to maybe another tenant's use of the washing machine. Is that fair to say?
You can answer that.
I said that I could be, I'm sorry, what was your question?
Sure. Are you potentially sensitive? I'll ask the question better. If somebody uses a washing machine before you do, depending on what they put in there, could that trigger you?
I'm object. I think that we're heading down a path of sort of seeking, personal medical information from a non-party to this case.
This isn't a medical question. This is really a, does something.
A topic questioning that Mr. Poxson never would have been able to pursue.
But we're at a hearing. We're not, this is beyond the point of what he can ask under FHA.
So I'm going to just cut off this conversation here. Ms. Vandermeulen, did you ever, more specifically, did you ever, call your landlord, Mr. Poxson, or anybody else at BTB Group about any issues in the laundry room relating to your asthma? Did that ever come up for you?
No.
Okay. And so, you testified earlier that you called about smoke.
That's actually not true. One time I have a very strong sense of smell. I think that's protective. It protects the lungs. It's like the blind person who has a keen sense of hearing. I have an extreme sensitivity to smell. Mm-hmm. And one time I had to contact them about a gas odor in the laundry room.
When you say a gas odor, do you mean like propane, or do you mean like
gas? The gas hookup. We have gas in the building.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thank you. Okay, very good. That sort of addresses my question. Attorney Gottlieb, do you have any other questions?
I do, maybe just a few, depending on the answers. Ms. Vandermolen, how many letters have you written to your landlord since 2007 with regard to issues you had because of other tenants in the building that would have triggered your asthma or allergies?
You can answer that.
My discussions have been verbal. I don't believe, does everybody understand that I'm 75 years old here? That I'm an elderly person? So to go back 14 years, I would say, as I recall, any discussions I've had have been verbal.
Okay, so Ms. Vandermeulen, is the only letter that you remember just that recent September 6th, 2021 letter?
Yes.
Okay, you don't remember doing anything else in writing like that?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, go ahead.
It's a question of recall.
Okay, so you're not necessarily saying, no, I didn't submit anything in writing. You're just saying that you don't remember whether you did.
I don't remember if I put anything in writing about any letters about other tenants.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Attorney Gottlieb.
Sure. Ms. Vandermolen, how often have you used your nebulizer as a result of mold or anything that triggers your condition?
It's impossible to say. Okay,
It's
go ahead.
I think it's a fair question, and here's the reason. The reason is because we're talking about an emotional support animal here. And if there is dander and it is going to trigger her, well, there are other things that also trigger her as well that would potentially be beyond the control of the landlord, such as mold or smoke or dust to a large extent. The nebulizer is essentially a rescue tool used by asthmatics.
All right, I'll yeah,
So-
I'll allow that question. How often do you use your nebulizer, Ms. Vandermolen?
As needed.
So what does that usually amount to in your experience at your apartment? And we're just talking about when you're in your apartment, not necessarily when you're out and about.
I'd have to have time to come up with some sort of number.
Is it common for you? Like, is it a couple of times a week? Maybe once or twice a month?
It's absolutely episodic. It can be a couple of times a week. It could be a couple of times. Asthma is also seasonal. There are just many things. All I know is if there is a dog in this building and I go out into my hallway, and that would put me in serious jeopardy. Other than that, there's nothing in the hallway that I would step out into that would put me in jeopardy. It's dusted, it's vacuumed, but then if there's an animal and the dog shakes, I would have to open my door and wonder whether I was going to have a trigger while walking to my car. It's a serious issue for me to have an animal in the building. I would be forced, and my lease would not be honored. I would be forced to move from my premise. I would not be able to stay here if there was a dog in the public areas in this building.
Okay,
and
thank
I'm
you,
very
Attorney
clear
Gottlieb.
about that.
Yeah, Ms. Vandermolen, the two inhalers that you have, is one an everyday inhaler and is the other one a rescue inhaler?
You
Yes,
can answer that.
How often do you use the rescue inhaler?
as needed.
Yeah, she's already answered that question.
Well, the rescue inhaler is different than the nebulizer.
Oh, okay.
The nebulizer is actually a machine that you have to plug into the wall and pour the albuterol solution into the
They're
cup.
they're both used for the same reason. So
Okay.
the question is the same.
Well, it's not
Question
because
the same that I answered previously.
the rescue inhaler you carry with you, you really don't carry a nebulizer with you to plug it into the wall at an emergency.
The end result of using both is the same. It's both of them are used for emergency situations.
Okay, I have nothing further.
All right, thank you. All right, I thank you all very much for your time. We've gotten to the conclusion of the fact finding today. So Ms. Vandermeulen, you are excused if you want to hang up. If you want to, remain for the conclusion of the conference, you can. What I'm going to do right now is we're going to turn it over to counsel to make closing arguments, and then we will conclude for the day after that. So first, we're going to go to Attorney Gottlieb. And Attorney Gottlieb, you have the floor for your closing statement.
Thank you. So we're here because Mr. Poxson refused to acknowledge the fact that my client had an emotional support animal. My client did not disclose that to Mr. Poxson for the exact reason that we're here for today, is that she was afraid that she was going to be discriminated against. Mr. Poxson admittedly didn't really have any reasonable accommodation requests submitted to him. I guess as a landlord, that's really lucky over a 15-year period that there was not a single request for a reasonable accommodation, apparently. I don't characterize somebody asking for some help cleaning snow off their personal vehicle is really a reasonable accommodation request. When my client applied, the question on the application was, do you have any pets? And the answer was no. And the reason why the answer was no was because it's not a pet. It's an emotional support animal. My client has a letter dated from February of 2021, 3 months in advance of filing or submitting an application with Mr. Poxson for the apartment in question. So it's not as if she rented the apartment and then decided, I want to get a dog and I'm going to have this dog turned into an emotional support animal because that's what I need. This was a pre-existing condition. And when she informed Mr. Poxson of that, he never once acknowledged that this was an emotional support animal. He referred to it just as an animal or a pet. The emails are clear that he responds to it saying, I will not allow pets in the building. Now, this is even kind of after Attorney Kelsey had indicated and told Mr. Poxson, hey, you have to comply with fair housing laws. He still didn't change his mind, and instead he just refunded the check, despite the fact that my client had a lawful right to the apartment at that point in time. She signed a lease. He refused to give the keys to her. Now, I can certainly appreciate that there's a tenant here who would have been her neighbor that has asthma and allergies, but that does not diminish my client's rights under FHA, Fair Housing Act, to live in the apartment. Mr. Poxson made no effort to try to accommodate both of the tenants, which it's our position he was absolutely required to do. We heard testimony from Ms. Vandermolen, and her testimony is what I would have expected it to be, choppy at best. There's a lot of inconsistency with her testimony. There are things that trigger her, and she's asthmatic, but she never submitted a request for a reasonable accommodation from Mr. Poxson. It's not really clear whether or not Mr. Poxson did in fact provide the HEPA filtration, or whether or not they pay for the continued changing of the filters. There's been nothing to that. And there's also a real question as to what the purpose of the letter from September was. There was a conversation that took place between Mr. Poxson and Ms. Vandermolen, and that's when she was first alerted to that fact. However, it's dated September 6th. I have nothing to back up when that was the case. She might have emailed it to him. She might not have emailed it to him. There's still a lot of clarification that I think is necessary. But one thing that does not need any clarification here is that Mr. Poxson clearly violated my client's rights under the Fair Housing Act with regard to the emotional support animal. And for that, it's there needs to be a finding of reasonable cause. While Mr. Poxson certainly in an unenviable spot, this could have been taken care of with whether that's additional filtration in the tenant's unit and my client's unit as well. We're never going to know because of the violation of my client's rights. So with that, I do think that there should be a finding of cause with regard to discrimination by the commission.
All right. Thank you very much, Attorney Gottlieb. Attorney McQueenie, your closing statement.
I think there's a way that the testimony could all exist at the same time without any bad actors, that nobody was lying. There might be no bad guys in this story. Sometimes accommodations are about allocating a limited resource. It's not about sort of determining the deal with disabled people. I think you look at sort of the request that Ms. DeVito made, and it really sort of touches on a lot of important points as far as, the commission's position on reasonable accommodations. I think if you were to go to, if you called 5 different CHRO staff attorneys and asked them, what should Randy Poxson have said to an individual, Ms. DeVito, about the neighbor's disability and need for, I think you get 5 different answers. That's a really hard question to answer. And that's for, fair housing litigators to have a problem answering that. HUD and CHRO recognize that that's a very difficult task. What can you share? There's privacy concerns that she has. And I think Ms. Vandermolen certainly made those privacy concerns known during just in the fact finding alone. I think that there's a danger. I think it also sort of illustrates the danger of, failing to disclose and hiding the fact that there is an animal of some kind. I think that there was a way to sort of, the commission always really focuses on making the parties engage in an interactive process about whether or not a disability. Who, it's very unusual. Usually it's the respondent who sort of fumbles that part and doesn't have sort of an interactive process where they can sort of exchange ideas and see whether there's a way they could do it less burdensome. That process was sabotaged by Ms. DeVito. She made it possible for BTB and Randy Poxson to sort of engage in discussion before she showed up and informed that she had an animal. I think that sort of parsing the legal definitions of an animal, a support animal, a companion animal, I think that you're going to get, that's not unusual for it to sort of be characterized differently. I think the confusion about the ADA and the FHA, these are things that housing providers and the commission encounter daily. I think that you sort of look at what they're doing, look at what's, I think the commission is sort of, you look at this case and sort of more like a lot of the multiple chemical sensitivities cases that HUD and CHRO have processed over the years. And then I think it's also sort of about, you see these problems echoed in the sort of the smoking restrictions on public housing authorities. These are very challenging issues that sort of experienced fair housing litigators and administrative agencies designed sort of exclusively to protect the individual's rights. These are the hard ones. Sort of, I don't think that Mr. Poxson got any part of this wrong. I think that had Ms. DeVito disclosed it, I think she would have been able to, he might have been able to offer her more of an explanation. I think that the complaint was filed with the expectation that, Ms. Vandermalen was not going to be sort of in there. And, she was being questioned by, 2 attorneys. I know you say you haven't passed the bar yet, Jonathan, but, essentially 2 attorneys for just about 30 minutes. She didn't budge. She was very consistent in her testimony. She had a problem and she was and she was very clear that she made her landlord aware of that problem. And she was there for 14 years. I mean, there's nothing, nothing in her responses today. And she got questions today that Randy Poxson never could have asked her, or would have been a violation. Is she disabled? He's allowed to verify whether or not she is disabled. But here, she was clear that there was no other vacancy that could have been offered to Ms. DeVito. I think that these are very challenging. It's sort of almost asking him to evaluate degrees of disability, which is very challenging. I think that sort of the commission sort of focus, their focus ought to be on making sure that there's no sort of people sort of having their rights violated. Ms. DeVito's rights weren't violated. She hid the fact that she had an animal, and then when she sort of did alert her landlord, I think you have 2 people that are sort of, it's a communication problem. I'll accept her explanation that, she had been denied these apartments in the past because of the existence of her animal. And maybe that's why she decided to hide it from Mr. Poxson. But I think it's also fair to say Mr. Poxson was certainly trying to protect the disability-related needs of his current tenant. It was not designed to sort of avoid any contact with a disabled individual. It's all been borne out. You heard this Vandermalen's testimony today. There was nothing else that Mr. Poxson could have done. Could he have phrased his responses a little more artfully? That's probably fair. But I think the same criticism would sort of go to Ms. DeVito. She could have presented this problem in a way that was really, did follow the spirit of HUD and CHRO, encouraging people to engage in the interactive process, and she didn't. So I disagree. I think it should be no reasonable cause. What conduct is CHRO sort of targeting to eliminate with Mr. Poxson? I'm sure that next time around, if it ever does happen again, he'll use the correct verbiage. And I think that, you could say that Mr. Poxson has been lucky that he's never had a CHRO claim before, or you could say that, whether or not he called it, what the correct statute number, he's been looking out for the disability-related needs of all the 15 years. That's another reason why maybe he doesn't have any CHRO complaints filed against him, because he's responsive. So with that, I would urge that, you take a look at that, and there really has not been any misconduct by Mr. Poxson or BTB. So an unfortunate situation. It's really more of a communication problem between 2 non-attorneys than an intent to discriminate.
Thank you, Attorney McQueenie. All right, so all thank you very much for your time today. So what's going to happen next is, I'm going to review all of the evidence that we have on file. At this point in time, I don't think it's going to be necessary. Oh, actually, you already sent in the copy of the floor plan, so I have that. Yeah, I don't think at this point in time that there's any additional evidence that I'm going to need to reach a finding. But after I thoroughly review all the testimony today and all of the evidence in the case file, I will issue my draft findings, and then the process from there will be, once I have to issue the draft findings, whether cause or no reasonable cause, the parties will have 15 days to provide comments. And then after that, I'll review the comments submitted by counsel, and then issue the final findings. And then, depending on which way the case shakes out, sort of changes how the procedure runs out from there. I anticipate it will be at least several weeks before I get the draft issued. I've got a fairly busy docket at the moment, and I'm working a reduced schedule as I prep for the bar. So it may be a little while before you hear from me again. But that is what we're looking at moving forward. So before we conclude for today, anybody have any further questions for me?
No.
No.
All right. Thank you all very much for your time. I hope you have a good day. And you got my email in case you need to get in touch with me. All right.
Thanks. Good luck on the bar, Jonathan.
Thank you. Hopefully I won't need the luck.
I don't know why anybody would want to do that to themselves unless it's to leave the state of Connecticut.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Take care.